The day he arrived, I was still folding laundry. White towels, his shirts, my husband's gym socks, every piece of cloth from our carefully calibrated life, arranged into color-coded stacks. The dryer door snapped shut behind me, but the sound that lingered was the cadence of his footsteps in the hallway. Unfamiliar, firmer than the quiet glide of slippers I had grown used to. I didn't know then that I would come to recognize those footsteps more intimately than my own heartbeat. My husband had told me only 3 days earlier. He just needs somewhere to stay until the paperwork is finalized, he said, meaning the divorce. I nodded. It wasn't a question. It never was with him. Just that practiced tone of certainty he used for business trips and buying houses. I didn't ask why his son had nowhere else to go or what the divorce truly meant. I was occupied preparing the guest room, smoothing the pillows, placing a neutral magazine on the nightstand, as if I were staging the house for people I would never meet. The first time I truly noticed him was in the kitchen. He stood with the refrigerator door open, shoulders slightly hunched, reaching for a bottle of water. His shirt clung to his back. Not wet, just close enough to reveal the outline of someone who once belonged to gyms and late-night showers. Not long emails and silent dinners. I had seen that posture before in men passing me at intersections, strangers lingering in cafes, but never within my own home. "Sorry, did I wake you?" he asked. His voice was gentler than I had anticipated, nothing like his father's, which always sounded rounded and worn at the edges. "No," I said, lying though I had been awake for almost 30 minutes, listening, wondering if I would hear his door open, if he would make coffee, if I should put on a robe. I was wearing the blue wraparound dress I always wore on Sundays. It wasn't provocative. It fit properly, but didn't demand attention. Even so, I was painfully conscious of the way the fabric rested against my skin. I wanted to withdraw to the bathroom, splash water on my face, fasten my collar again, but I stayed where I was. We occupied the kitchen like travelers forced to navigate around each other in an airport lounge. I watched him pour coffee into the wrong mug, the one I reserved for tea, and I said nothing to stop him. I could have corrected him, but I liked the quiet intimacy of the error, the way he touched something personal without realizing it. My husband entered moments later, snapping whatever delicate thread had begun to stretch between us. His presence, solid and habitual, occupied the room completely, and I found myself stepping closer to him, aligning without thinking. We exchanged small talk about the weather, traffic, and groceries, the kind of conversation that disappears the moment it ends. Still, I noticed how the other man leaned subtly toward me when he laughed, how his eyes paused on the way I wrapped my fingers around my cup. I told myself not to notice. I didn't succeed. Over the next several days, the rhythm of the house shifted. I adapted. I began waking earlier, just ahead of my husband, so I could sit alone in the kitchen with the early light, pretending I needed quiet before my first call. He would appear shortly after, freshly showered, hair still damp, wearing the same style of shirts his father had worn years before. Sometimes we spoke. Sometimes silence carried enough weight, but something was taking shape between us. Not quite tension, more an awareness, a muted pull. There is a moment, 4 days after he arrived, that still clings to me. My husband called to say he would be late. I didn't mind. I prepared a light dinner, a simple salad. He was already in the kitchen, chopping without being asked. We moved together easily, too easily. When his fingers brushed mine as he handed me the knife, I pulled away. He noticed. "Sorry," he said. "You don't have to apologize for touching someone," I replied. The words came quickly, edged, and I immediately regretted them. He looked at me then, not like his father, not like a son addressing someone who had known him since childhood. His gaze wasn't daring, but it was certain of what he saw. The air remained warm, though no burner was lit. We finished cooking in silence. At the table, our knees touched beneath the wood. I didn't shift. Neither did he. The sound of the front door made me tense. My husband came in smiling, asking if we had eaten. I lied again. Not yet. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay beside my husband, listening to the steady rise and fall of his breathing, feeling the warmth of his body without comfort. He had become so familiar he was nearly invisible. When he touched me, it felt practiced, predictable. I had once longed for that touch. Now, when his hand slid beneath my nightgown, I felt observed, not wanted. In the morning, I dressed with care. I chose a fitted blouse I hadn't worn in months. It wasn't suggestive, but it followed the line of my waist and stirred something I had forgotten. I added perfume, not the one my husband preferred, but the scent that lingered the longest. I stood at the counter, waiting. When he entered, he paused for only a fraction of a second, but I noticed it. The flicker, the held breath. He said nothing. He poured his coffee. I turned away, though my skin remembered. That was when I understood it wasn't imagination. There was a thread between us, invisible, too narrow and too close, the kind that made us hesitate before moving in the same direction. Shoulder brushing hip, a single second, long enough to register every inch. At dinner, I talked about the news, about work. My husband talked. I nodded, but my thoughts were elsewhere, fixed on him across the table. When he brushed my leg again, slower this time, I didn't pull away. Afterward, we washed the dishes together. My husband left for the den. Our hands met on a glass. Brief, but intentional. Neither of us withdrew. He didn't speak. Neither did I. Yet something inside me had shifted. Later that night, lying awake in the dark, I touched the place where his hand had been. I thought about his silence, about the way he hadn't looked away. Tomorrow, I knew, we would share the kitchen again. Maybe coffee, maybe something more. I should have felt guilt, but all I felt was the dull ache of anticipation. The next morning began the same way. My husband had left early. Something about a meeting across town, a breakfast seminar that required him to leave before sunrise. I heard his car pull away while I was still in bed, eyes open in the soft gray darkness. I didn't move. I stayed still, listening for the second set of footsteps. They came eventually, measured and unhurried. He thought he was alone. That knowledge slowed everything. The way I rose, the way I dressed, the way I chose what to wear. It was too early to pretend I had plans, but I still reached for the black tank top I usually wore to work out. It fit close, and I added a light cardigan over it. Part of me wanted to appear effortless. Another part wanted him to notice the effort. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already there, seated at the island, reading something on his phone, a cup of coffee in his hand. His back straightened slightly when he heard me. Not startled, just aware. That awareness lingered. I moved to the counter and reached deliberately for my husband's mug. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I wanted to disturb the balance of something that had been fixed for too long. He noticed. "You always use that one," he said quietly, without looking up. "He won't mind," I replied, my voice steady though my pulse wasn't. We drank in silence, the kitchen filled with the low hum of the refrigerator, the faint movement of morning air. I leaned against the island, my cardigan slipping just slightly from one shoulder, and I didn't adjust it. He glanced once, maybe twice, then lowered his eyes again, studying the rim of his cup as if it held a question he couldn't ask. The space between us thickened, not with action, but with awareness. I turned toward the refrigerator, pretending to look for something. I needed the movement more than I needed milk or fruit. When I faced him again, he was still watching. His expression wasn't daring, but steady, deliberate, and something shifted quietly inside me. Not a decision, not clarity, just recognition. I set the mug down harder than I intended. The sound startled us both. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I moved toward the sink, and as I passed him, the closeness caught, brief but impossible to ignore. The small geography of two people standing too near. I felt my breathing change. He didn't move. Neither did I. The moment slipped away. I went to the window, gripping the counter, staring at the pale light outside. The air felt charged, though nothing had been said or done. He remained behind me, silent. The distance between us filled with something unnamed. My phone buzzed on the counter, my husband reminding me about dinner plans. I read the message, then set the phone down carefully. "I should get ready for work," I said. He nodded. Nothing more. But as I left the room, I could feel his gaze follow me, quiet and unwavering. The rest of the day blurred into calls, meetings, a normal rhythm that felt hollow against what lingered. Every sound carried me back to that stillness in the kitchen, that look, that nearness. By evening, I had nearly convinced myself it had been nothing, a moment misunderstood. But standing in front of my closet, I found my hand drifting toward a soft camisole I hadn't worn in years. It was for no one but me. Still, it altered the way I moved once it was on. At dinner, everything returned to its familiar order. My husband asked about my day. I answered. He talked about his project. I nodded. We performed our roles. Across the table, his son spoke very little, eyes lowered, voice restrained, but every pause felt weighted. Beneath the table, a shift in the air, the faintest brush of movement, nothing intentional, just enough to remind me that the boundary we had crossed now existed between us, silent and undeniable. When I cleared the plates, he followed me into the kitchen again. Neither of us spoke. I could feel his presence, not close enough to touch, but near enough to alter the space. Finally, he said softly, "I shouldn't have let things get like this." I closed the dishwasher, my back still turned to him. "But they did," I said, the words barely audible. He didn't answer. He stood there a moment longer, then left. I stayed where I was, hands flat on the counter, staring at the dark reflection in the window. My face looked unchanged, my life intact in form, yet something beneath the surface had shifted its place. I went to bed beside my husband, his hand brushing my shoulder in a gesture so familiar it felt more like habit than touch. I stared into the darkness, sensing the low hum of change. I didn't know what would happen next, only that I wanted more. 2 days later, the suggestion came, simple and unremarkable. My husband, in his efficient, upbeat manner, announced a spontaneous trip to the lake house. "It'll be good for us," he said. "Quiet, no meetings, just time to breathe." He didn't notice the way my shoulders tightened. Or maybe he did and mistook it for strain. He assumed I needed rest. And perhaps I did, though not in the way he imagined. I smiled. I agreed. I packed the car that night, folding clothes carefully, each movement deliberate. I told myself this would be good. Distance, fresh air, perspective. But my hands shook once when I found myself packing a silk nightgown I hadn't worn in more than a year. I slipped it between a sweater and a pair of jeans, as if concealing proof from myself. He offered to drive one of the cars, logical and practical, but it meant time alone. The idea unsettled me. He mentioned picking up a neighbor and dropping her off partway in town. That detail made it sound harmless. I told myself it was fine, just a drive, just coincidence. The morning we left, the light was pale and new. I sat in the passenger seat, hands folded, the road stretching ahead in a quiet ribbon of gray. The neighbor chatted softly from the back seat, filling the space with polite conversation. I responded when necessary, smiled at the right moments, while my thoughts drifted elsewhere. But I was acutely aware of him beside me. The way his presence filled the small space, the scent of soap mingling with the cold air clinging to his jacket, the steady rhythm of his breathing. When we dropped her off, the sun was already beginning to sink. The road ahead stretched open, silent, and the air between us felt charged again, not with words, but with everything waiting to be spoken. The sun dipped lower, painting the treetops in amber light, the kind that city dwellers chase through glass towers but never feel against their skin. The silence that followed weighed heavier than the neighbor's polite chatter had been. I kept my gaze fixed on the road, leaning slightly toward the window, as if distance itself could steady me. "We'll be there in 20, he said at last, voice low even. I nodded. Good. We didn't speak again, only the sound of tires on gravel, the road narrowing between tall pines until the lake house appeared through the quiet branches, still caught in an early autumn hush. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Inside, nothing had changed. The familiar scent of wood and dust, rugs worn thin, windows streaked with last season's rain. My husband moved through the space easily, whistling as he carried bags to the bedroom. I opened windows, turned on lights, letting in air that felt older than the walls. Dinner was simple, reheated food, half a bottle of wine, the soft clink of silverware. My husband spoke about work, schedules, details that filled space but did not interrupt the silence. Across the table, I felt the weight of awareness, of who sat nearby, of who avoided looking up, of what hovered unsaid. When my husband finally yawned and excused himself for the night, I lingered at the sink longer than necessary, washing a single plate until the water ran cold. "I'll be out here for a bit," I said, and he nodded absently, kissing my cheek before disappearing down the hall. The fire in the hearth had burned low. I added a log and watched the embers flare, the light catching the edges of the room in soft gold. When he entered, he moved quietly, not hesitant, not bold, simply aware. He sat across from me near the fire. For a long while, neither of us spoke. When he finally did, it was almost a whisper. "Do you regret it?" I didn't answer at first, studying the flames as they licked upward, constant but uncertain. "No," I said at last, voice low, steady. He nodded once. "Me neither." The wood cracked sharply, making me startle. He looked at me then, not smiling, not seeking, only seeing. The silence that followed was full, not empty. I stood to leave. He didn't stop me. His restraint, quiet and certain, felt both merciful and unbearable. I walked down the hallway barefoot, the wood cool beneath my feet. Halfway to my room, I stopped. Through the door's reflection, I saw the flicker of the fire still illuminating his face. Then I turned away, stepping instead into the guest room. I lay there in the dark, heart steady but restless, not from guilt, but from the weight of everything left unspoken. Morning came slow at the lake, the light soft and uncertain, as if even the sun hesitated to reveal what the night had concealed. I woke early, before anyone else. The stillness in the house felt suspended, not peaceful, as if everything waited for direction. The sheets were cool, the air faintly scented with cedar and dust. I dressed quietly. Leggings, sweater, hair tied back, every motion small, careful, invisible. When I entered the kitchen, he was already there, making coffee. 2 mugs sat beside the pot. He nodded when he saw me, a silent greeting that carried more than words. We moved in near silence as he poured. When he handed me a mug, our fingers brushed for only a heartbeat, but long enough to leave its mark. I stepped back, steadying myself. "You slept in the other room," he said quietly, still facing the window. "I didn't want to wake you," I replied. We both knew it wasn't true. Neither corrected it. Later, my husband emerged, bright and talkative. He suggested a walk around the lake, and I agreed. The air outside was sharp and cool, the path damp with fallen leaves. My husband walked ahead, pointing out trees and the first traces of frost. We followed behind, silent, our footsteps in rhythm, though our thoughts were not. At one point, the trail curved and my husband disappeared around a bend. He glanced back at me just once, eyes steady, unreadable. That single look made the world pause. That evening, the temperature had dropped further. My husband built another fire, admiring the way it caught. I curled up on the couch, wine glass in hand, pretending to follow his words. Across the room, he sat in the old chair, a book open in his hands, untouched. When my husband went to shower, the quiet returned, familiar and heavy. "Heavy," he said finally. "I've been trying not to think about it," he admitted. "Has it helped?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not really." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. He closed the book and stood, moving toward the hallway, pausing near the couch. His hand brushed the back lightly, not seeking, just lingering there for a moment, suspended. Then he stepped back and left. When my husband returned, cheerful and oblivious, I smiled and nodded as needed. But lying beside him in the dark later, I couldn't find rest. The fire's glow lingered in my mind, the weight of everything unsaid pressing against the silence. Tomorrow we would return home, to walls that knew too much, to the careful quiet that awaited us. Yet something inside had shifted. and I knew it would not return to its previous place. We drove home on a Sunday evening, the city unfolding outside the windows in a blur of traffic lights and familiar shapes. Everything looked unchanged: the streets, storefronts, the glow of apartment windows, but the air between us felt altered, stretched thin by the weight of what had occurred. My husband drove, humming along to the radio, already talking about the week ahead, work calls, errands, plans to clean the garage. His ease amazed me. He seemed untouched by the silence pressing around us, or perhaps he noticed and chose not to acknowledge it. In the back seat, his son sat quietly. I didn't look at him, but I felt the space his presence occupied, a subtle hum beneath the surface. At home, I kept myself busy with unnecessary tasks: unpacking, straightening, folding laundry already neat. Each movement was a way to anchor myself, to keep thoughts from drifting toward the unspoken. When I reached into my bag and touched the silk camisole I had packed but never worn, I paused. The fabric was cool, soft, delicate, almost too fragile for the light of the room. I folded it carefully and tucked it away, as if hiding something larger than cloth. Dinner was quiet. My husband filled the air with stories about a client and a new project, and I nodded at the right moments. His son sat across from me, eyes lowered, each movement deliberate. When the phone rang, my husband excused himself brightly, stepping into the study. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, thick, with everything we didn't say. He glanced up once briefly. I didn't meet his eyes, but I felt it all the same. Later, I stood before the bathroom mirror, water running though I didn't wash my face. My reflection was both familiar and strange, not changed in form, but in something quieter, a subtle awareness, a shift I couldn't name. I dressed simply, brushed my hair, and tried to breathe in time with the quiet house. Passing his room in the hallway, the door slightly ajar, unlit, I didn't slow. Yet the air changed as I walked by, the kind of awareness that lingers without sound or motion. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I went to the kitchen for water, letting the cool light of the open door spill across the tiles. Footsteps approached, slow, careful, familiar. I didn't turn immediately. The space filled with the sound of breath, the stillness of two people suspended in knowing. He stopped a few feet away. Neither of us spoke. The quiet was enough. When I finally turned, his expression held calm certainty, as if he had made peace with what words could not convey. I didn't move closer. He didn't either. But something passed between us, subtle, undeniable. A moment stretched thin, trembling with the weight of choice. He was the one to step away first. The sound of his retreating footsteps left a quiet, deep ache behind. I returned to the bedroom, the bed beside my husband untouched by the shift I carried within me. He slept soundly, untroubled. I lay awake, staring into the dark, aware that something had crossed a boundary invisible but permanent. In the following days, everything appeared ordinary. Breakfast, laundry, work, emails. The rhythm of domestic life resumed, seamless on the surface. Yet inside me, the world moved differently. Each glance, each silence, each shared space felt charged. I found myself listening for his footsteps, noticing when they didn't come. I rearranged the spice rack as if order could mute the noise inside me, as if structure could replace the pull I kept trying not to name. It didn't work. In the afternoon, my husband came home early. He brought takeout from my favorite place, something he rarely did without reason. He smiled, kissed my cheek, telling me I looked tired and beautiful all at once. I stood there, towel in hand, unable to hold his gaze for more than a second. I wanted to feel grateful, to feel warmth, but all I could sense was distance, the gap between what I should have felt and what I actually did. That night, he reached for me with quiet affection, the kind that comes from years of knowing another person's rhythms. I allowed it, not from desire, but because it was easier than explaining the restlessness under my skin. I listened to his breathing in the dark and thought of everything I couldn't say. The ceiling above me felt endless. My heart thumped loudly while my body remained still. I thought of the other kind of silence, the one that hummed like a pulse, the one I had tried to forget. When he finally turned over, I lay still, fingers curled around the edge of the sheet, feeling like a house left intact after guests had gone, yet emptied. The next morning, I dressed deliberately black turtleneck, fitted trousers, careful makeup not for attention, but as armor. In the kitchen, he was already there, pouring coffee, moving with the same careful rhythm I had come to memorize. He handed me a cup without looking up. Our fingers brushed barely. We did not speak. That day, I tried to return to my old self, the one who found comfort in routine, who believed purpose could replace confusion. I cleaned, organized, worked late, rearranging drawers that didn't need it. I considered calling someone, but didn't know where to start. How do you explain wanting two opposite lives at once? Instead, I wrote not a letter, not a confession, just words that felt like breathing. Words like silence, warmth, distance, ache. I didn't sign them. When I closed the notebook, the quiet pressed heavier. That evening, we sat in the living room. My husband scrolled through the news, reading headlines aloud. I nodded, smiled, responded appropriately. He seemed content, unaware of how far away I had drifted. Across the room, I felt another gaze on me, steady, cautious. When our eyes met, he looked away. Later, when my husband stepped out to take a call, I found myself in the kitchen again, pretending to tidy what was already clean. I didn't expect him to follow, but he did. The air shifted, dense, charged with all the things neither of us could say. He stood by the counter, arms folded, watching me. "You're not okay," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer immediately. When I finally turned to face him, he already knew. "I don't know what I am," I admitted. He stepped closer, careful, respectful, the kind of proximity that speaks everything without crossing a line. I felt the air between us warm. "I haven't stopped thinking about it," he said. His honesty landed like a truth I had tried to outrun. I swallowed hard, searching for words, but none came. My husband's voice called from the hallway something ordinary, grounding. We did not move. We stayed there, suspended between what was real and what waited. When he left the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, breathing unevenly. I tried to recall the simpler version of myself, the one who lived quietly, safely, predictably. But she was fading. In her place stood someone else uncertain, awake, unable to unfeel what she had experienced. It happened on a Tuesday so ordinary it disguised the weight of what came next. The sky was pale gray, the air sharp with early frost. I was wiping the counters when my husband walked in, briefcase in hand, his face bright with satisfaction. He told me he'd be gone for a week, work trip, meetings, dinners, another city. He kissed my cheek as he spoke, already half distracted by his phone. I smiled, nodded, asked all the right questions, played my part. He didn't think to ask whether I would be fine here alone. Why would he? That night, I lay beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, counting the hours until his departure. I thought about everything I would pretend to do while he was away. The morning he left, I didn't get up to see him off. I heard the door close softly, the sound of the car pulling away, and then stillness. The house felt different. Not quieter, not emptier, just unguarded. The balance had shifted. The routine of 3 had given way to the uncertainty of 2. I made coffee, lingered by the window, stood barefoot in the kitchen without turning on the lights. I wasn't waiting, not exactly, but I didn't move until I heard footsteps on the stairs. He appeared without a word, hair still damp, sleeves rolled up, carrying the same quiet that had filled the spaces between us for weeks. The light from the window caught the edge of his face, soft and distant. I handed him a mug, careful not to meet his eyes. Our fingers brushed, brief and accidental, and that was enough. The morning drifted like fog. We stayed in separate rooms, pretending to work, yet I could feel him in every sound. The creak of a floorboard, the turn of a page, the low hum of his presence upstairs. The house seemed to breathe with us. By afternoon, I stopped trying to distract myself. The stillness pressed in. I turned off my screen and sat by the window. My reflection looked back at me, composed, calm, but alert, as if waiting for something unnamed to arrive. When I finally stood, I dressed with intention, each layer chosen like a thought I could hold on to. The air was cool, still carrying the weight of rain. In the kitchen, he was already there, cooking. The scent of rosemary and garlic hung in the air, grounding and familiar. We ate quietly, the kind of quiet that didn't ask to be broken. Every gesture felt deliberate, as if speaking might unravel the fragile balance that had settled between us. After dinner, we stood close enough to feel each other's warmth without touching. The room hummed with something we both understood, but refused to name. His eyes met mine. Not a question, not a plea, just recognition. The world beyond the windows faded. In that stillness, words would have been too heavy. We didn't cross the distance. We simply allowed it to exist, charged and alive, a secret suspended between heartbeats. That night, sleep came in fragments. The house felt too quiet, as if listening. I lay awake, my breathing slow and steady, aware of how different the air felt now. When morning arrived, I opened my eyes to the same ceiling, the same faint crack in the corner. Yet everything beneath it had shifted. The light was softer, the silence deeper. I turned and found the space beside me empty, but not lonely. The echo of the night remained, not as memory, but as presence. I moved through the house unhurried, wrapped in a calm I didn't recognize. I made coffee, watched the steam rise, stood barefoot by the window. Outside, the air was pale with early frost. He sat on the couch reading, his expression easy, unguarded. When our eyes met, something wordless passed between us, a quiet understanding that needed no explanation. He smiled faintly and turned the page. The day unfolded in a rhythm that felt both new and inevitable. We spoke little. The silence had softened, no longer tense, just full. When I passed him in the hallway, his hand brushed lightly against mine, an echo rather than an action. It was enough. As the afternoon deepened, I realized I had stopped listening for the sound of the front door, the familiar footsteps, the voice that had long filled the space with certainty. Instead, I moved through the house as though it belonged to a different version of me, one who no longer needed to pretend nothing had changed. That evening, we cooked together again. The simple rhythm of chopping, stirring, passing utensils felt unexpectedly intimate. Every small movement carried meaning, but neither of us tried to name it. Later, we sat in the living room, the television murmuring softly in the background. The world outside continued, unaware. He looked at me then, his expression steady. "We can't keep this," he said quietly. It wasn't a warning or regret, just a truth placed gently between us. I met his eyes and nodded. "No," I said, "we can't." But the air between us disagreed. That night, I stood beneath the shower and let the water run until it turned cool. The house was still, but not empty. What had begun as longing had become something quieter, something that would not leave, no matter how carefully I tried to wash it away. By morning, I understood that whatever had shifted inside me would not return to what it had been before. It lived there now, quiet and undeniable. The next day, my husband returned. He stepped into the house with the same casual warmth, the same habitual question. "Did you miss me?" I kissed his cheek. I smiled. I nodded. And in that brief moment, standing in the doorway, the weight of all that had shifted within me pressed close, quiet, invisible, heavy as breath. I felt the distance between what I had been, what I had become, and what I could no longer unsee. My husband unpacked his suitcase, his voice filling the room with ordinary stories. Hotel, coffee, restless nights, long meetings blurring together. I listened, offered the practiced smile, the gentle laughter belonging to the version of me he knew. I was convincing. I had always been convincing. But across the room, I felt another gaze, steady, wordless, aware, not demanding, not searching, simply there. Later, when my husband wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder, murmuring softly about home, dinner, comfort, I smiled. My hands found his, fingers light, affectionate. But somewhere inside, I was already distant. Not absent, not cold, just elsewhere. Once you have been seen, truly seen, you cannot return to invisibility. We ate together that night, the three of us, a family in perfect formation. Plates clinked, glasses touched, conversation flowed in practiced rhythm. Beneath it all, something unspoken lingered still and unyielding. Not guilt, not betrayal, just truth. A truth that refused to fade. I often wonder if anyone else could have sensed it. Not strangers, not coworkers, but someone who once knew me before life became a series of roles and expectations. Perhaps my mother, if she were here. Perhaps my sister, before distance and years wore away our closeness. Maybe an old friend from another version of my life, the one where I still believed wanting something more was possible. Because something in me has quietly come undone, not shattered, not lost, just loosened thread by thread. The careful stitching of composure and duty, the small daily rehearsals of being who I was supposed to be, have begun to give way, and I no longer rush to mend them. Now, I wake each morning not with panic, but with stillness. I go through the motions, dressing, cooking, smiling, responding, but my mind lives elsewhere. My husband speaks of plans, schedules, errands, and I respond exactly as expected. The familiarity between us is smooth, unbroken. He doesn't notice the distance, and I don't point it out. His world remains steady, untouched. The sun and I are careful, painfully so. Every movement, every glance measured, controlled. No touches that could linger, no words that could carry meaning. What remains is silence, constant and alive, humming like a quiet second pulse beneath the day. It follows us through rooms, in small gestures, in pauses stretched just long enough to remember. Sometimes I forget, sometimes I pretend. Like the Sunday at the farmer's market. Sunlight warm on my skin, laughter too easy to be real. We moved together as any family might ordinary. Unremarkable. My husband kissed my cheek before walking away, and in the reflection of the car window, I caught the sun's gaze. For a breath, time held still. I let myself imagine something impossible, the idea of escape, of beginning again somewhere no one knew us. But the light turned green. The car moved. The moment dissolved into the ordinary. That evening, in front of the mirror, I saw a woman I both recognized and did not. Same blouse, same earrings, same practiced smile. But beneath it, I wore the lace camisole, soft against my skin, unseen, deliberate. It wasn't for him. It wasn't for anyone. A small rebellion, a reminder that I still possess something entirely my own. My husband entered the room, buttoning his cuff. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. He smiled. "You look nice tonight." I thanked him. He didn't notice the silence in my voice. At dinner with friends, I performed my role flawlessly, toasting, laughing, responding at all the right moments. I almost believed the ease of it. Almost. But sometimes, mid-laughter, I felt myself drift not toward regret or fantasy, but toward memory. The memory of being seen, of being understood without explanation, of quiet recognition that reshapes the soul. That is what changed me. Not the act, not the risk, not even the closeness, but the simple fact that I allowed myself to want again, to feel alive enough to notice. And now, even as I walk these same rooms, in these same shoes, my life appears unchanged. But I know better. I am no longer who I was. At dinner, my husband touches my hand across the table. I smile the same smile he knows. Later, at home, I undress in silence, blouse on the hook, rings placed neatly on the tray. But I leave the lace beneath. I slip into bed beside him, his breathing steady, the night calm. I close my eyes not to sleep, but to feel, to hold close the quiet truth that will never fade. A truth without a future, a wound without a scar.